The pratfall effect. The first time you saw it happen, you probably didn't even register why it worked. Someone walks into a room, sharp, composed, the kind of person who seems to have already won whatever conversation is about to happen. They're mid-sentence, confident, and then they knock their elbow into a glass of water. It tips, soaks half the table, and in that 1 second, before anyone even says anything, the room softens towards them. Not less impressed, more drawn in. That's the whole trick, and psychologists have a name for it. The pratfall effect, a small harmless mistake made by someone who's already proven they're competent, doesn't lower how much we like them. It raises it. Here's the part that makes sense once you slow down and look at it. Think about a perfectly smooth wall, white, flawless, no texture anywhere. You walk past it, and your eyes slide right off. Now picture that same wall with one small crack running through it. Suddenly you're looking closer. The crack gives your eyes somewhere to land. Flawless people work the same way on us. They're impressive, but there's nothing to hold on to, no texture, nothing that feels like ours to relate to. The stumble is the crack. It's the part of them we can actually reach. It only works one way, though. The mistake has to come after the competence, not before it. Someone who's already proven they're sharp gets to spill the water and seem human. Someone who hasn't proven anything yet just spills water and seems clumsy. The crack only reads as charming on a wall that was already standing. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it quietly explains a lot of what we call charisma. The most magnetic people you know probably aren't the ones who never miss. They're the ones who let you see miss the joke that doesn't land, the name they forget, the small, visible proof that they're not performing perfection. We don't actually want flawless. We want competent, with a window left open, which means somewhere tomorrow you're going to fumble something small in front of someone, and for once you don't have to dread it. That little stumble might be the exact moment they decide they like you, the Forer effect. Barnum effect. You've probably taken one of those online quizzes, the kind that asks 12 questions about your habits and spits out a paragraph describing your personality. And the strange part isn't that it was wrong, it's that it felt like someone had been quietly watching you for years. That feeling has a name. Psychologists call it the Forer effect, after a researcher named Bertram Forer, who ran a simple experiment back in 1948. He gave a room full of students a personality test, then handed each of them a personalized result. Every single person got the exact same paragraph, and when he asked how accurate it felt, most of them rated it close to perfect. The paragraph worked because of what was actually written in it, not because of any real insight. Lines like, "You have a need for people to like you, yet you tend to be critical of yourself." Or, "At times you have serious doubts about whether you've made the right decision." Read those again. They're true of almost everyone alive, but because they were framed as being about you specifically, your brain did something sneaky. It went looking for the part of your life that matched, ignored the part that didn't, and called the whole thing proof. Think of it like a coat left on a hook in a dim hallway. From a distance, vague enough, it could be anyone's coat. But if someone tells you it's yours, you'll swear you remember wearing it. This is the exact mechanism behind horoscopes, fortune tellers, and most of those uncannily accurate personality breakdowns that go viral. None of them are reading you. They're reading everyone, in language loose enough that everyone can climb inside it and feel seen. And it's worth catching, because it's not just for sale on astrology apps and carnival tents, It's quietly available to anyone trying to sell you something. A manager who tells you, "I can tell you're someone who really cares about doing things right," isn't necessarily wrong about you. They just know it's true of almost every person they'll ever say it to. So somewhere down the line, the next time a description of you feels eerily exact, a quiz, a stranger, a cold reading, it might be worth a quiet second look, not because it's a lie, exactly, just because it might be a mirror with your name written on the glass. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon. A friend mentions a word you've never heard before, some obscure little term, used once, in passing. And then, 2 days later, it's in a podcast. Then a stranger says it on the train. Then it's in a headline. By the 4th time, you start to wonder if the universe is trying to tell you something. It isn't. What's actually happening has a clinical name, the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, named almost by accident after a German militant group that 2 people happened to mention to each other on the same day decades ago, and noticed the coincidence felt too strange to be nothing. The mechanism underneath it is almost insultingly simple. Your brain is constantly filtering an enormous, chaotic stream of information, throwing out almost everything, because almost none of it is useful to you. The moment that word becomes known, tagged, filed, given a folder, your brain stops throwing it away. It was always there, in conversations, in articles, in the background noise of your day. You just never had a reason to catch it before. It's less like the world suddenly filled up with that word, and more like a single light switched on in a room that was already full of furniture you'd never noticed. This is why people swear a song is following them after a breakup, why a newly diagnosed person suddenly sees the same illness mentioned everywhere, why a pregnant woman starts seeing strollers on every street corner she's walked down for years. None of it is new. It's attention, dressed up as fate. And there's something almost comforting buried in that, if you sit with it long enough. We like to believe the world is sending us signs that the universe noticed us and started arranging coincidences in our favor. The truth is smaller, but in its own way, just as remarkable. Your mind is built to find patterns so fast, so automatically, that it can manufacture the feeling of being noticed out of nothing more than a single, ordinary act of paying attention. So the next time something seems to be following you, a name, a number, a song, you don't have to feel haunted by it. You can just feel the quiet, strange comfort of catching your own mind, mid-search, doing exactly what it was built to do. The overjustification effect. There's a kid somewhere right now, sitting on a kitchen floor, drawing for no reason at all, not for praise, not for a grade, just because the crayon feels good in their hand and the picture is becoming something. Nobody asked them to do it. Nobody's paying them for it. They'd do it again tomorrow with nothing waiting for them on the other side. Now give that kid a gold star every time they finish a drawing, a sticker, $1. Watch what happens over the next few weeks. The drawings don't get better. They get fewer and quieter somehow, even when they happen, because something shifted underneath the activity itself. The drawing used to be the whole point. Now it's a transaction, and transactions can be evaluated. Was the reward big enough? Was it worth the effort? A question that never existed before has moved in and started living there. This is the overjustification effect, and it was actually proven in a real experiment with real kids and real crayons. Researchers gave 1/3 of them a reward for drawing, 1/3 an unexpected reward afterward, and left the last third alone. Weeks later, only the kids who'd been promised a reward up front had lost interest. The ones who got nothing and the ones who got a surprise still drew just as much as before. Picture a candle burning in a closed room. It doesn't need anything from outside to keep going. It's feeding on something that was already there. Now, open a window and blow a fan across it. For a second, it burns brighter. Then it goes out faster than it would have on its own. External reward works the same way on internal motivation. It looks like fuel. It's actually wind. It's worth sitting with, because this is quietly everywhere in adult life, dressed up as good incentive design. The hobby someone loved that turned into a side hustle, and somehow stopped feeling like rest. The volunteer work that became a line on a resume, and started feeling like a chore the moment it counted for something. We assume adding a reward on top of something we love can only help. Mostly, it just changes what the thing is for, quietly, permanently, without ever announcing that it happened. So if there's something in your life you still do purely because you want to, not for money, not for anyone watching it, might be worth leaving it exactly as unrewarded as it already is. Some fires only stay lit in still air. The Kohler effect. There's a particular kind of swimmer who hates being the weakest one in the relay. Not hates losing, hates being the reason. And something strange happens to that swimmer when the race actually starts. They swim faster than they ever do alone in practice. Not by a little, sometimes by a lot. Slower swimmers, paired with faster ones in a team task, will consistently outperform their own personal best, as long as the team's result depends on every single person finishing. This is the Kohler effect, named after a German researcher who noticed it almost 100 years ago, studying rowers, and it runs against most of what we assume about teamwork. We tend to think groups make people lazy, that someone always coasts while others carry the weight. And sometimes that's true, but flip the setup slightly, so the whole team's outcome rests on the weakest link, not the average, and the opposite happens. The weak link tightens itself. Think about a tug-of-war rope held by 10 people, but the rope is only as strong as its thinnest strand. Everyone on that rope knows it. The thin strand isn't being watched out of suspicion, it's being watched out of need. And something about being indispensable, rather than just present, changes how hard a person is willing to pull. It comes down to two things stacking on top of each other. First, the weak performer can finally see, in real time, exactly how their effort stacks against someone better, and that comparison stings in a useful way, the kind that makes you push rather than give up. Second, and this is the part that matters more, they know the group's fate is genuinely riding on them, not symbolically, actually. If they slow down, everyone loses. That's a different kind of pressure than just, try your best. It's, you are the bottleneck, and the bottleneck is the whole story. It's a strange comfort, if you think about where you've landed, in your own life, a team, a family, a project where you felt like the least capable person in the room. That position, the one that feels like the most exposed, the most likely to be quietly resented, is often exactly the spot where people find a strength they didn't know they had stored away. So if you're ever the slowest swimmer in the lane, the newest hire on the team, the one everyone's quietly worried about keeping up, that worry might be doing something for you that comfort never could. The Ringelmann effect. A rope, 8 people pulling on one end. You'd assume 8 people pull 8 times as hard as one. They don't. Not even close. Each person, swallowed into the group, quietly pulls less than they would alone. And nobody decided to slack off. Nobody noticed themselves doing it. This was discovered by accident, oddly enough, by a French engineer named Ringelmann, who was studying farm equipment, not people. He measured how much force individuals exerted, pulling a rope alone, then in groups of increasing size. The math should have been simple: 2 people, twice the force. Instead, the bigger the group got, the smaller everyone's individual contribution became. By 8 people, each person was pulling at barely half their solo strength. 2 different things are tangled together here, and it's worth pulling them apart. Part of it is coordination. 8 people can't perfectly time a single pull the way one person times their own muscles, so some force is lost just to people being slightly out of sync, like 8 oars hitting water at 8 slightly different angles. But the bigger part is something quieter, almost invisible to the person doing it. When effort gets folded into a crowd, and no one can quite tell who's pulling hard and who's coasting, something in us relaxes without permission. Not laziness exactly. More like the body downshifting the second it senses it won't be caught. Picture a single lamp in a room, throwing one tight, accountable circle of light. Add 7 more lamps, all aimed at the same spot, and that one circle becomes a glow nobody can trace back to its source. Your effort still exists in there somewhere. It's just no longer visible enough to need defending. This is the quiet engine behind group projects that produce less than the sum of their members. Committees that move slower with more people in the room. The brainstorm where 4 people generate fewer ideas than one person would have alone. It's not that the extra people are bad. It's that the bigger the group, the easier it becomes for any one person's effort to disappear into it unnoticed, including, almost certainly, your own. So if you've ever wondered why a team of 10 can feel like it's accomplishing less than 3 people who actually own their piece of it, this is most of the answer. The rope doesn't care how many hands are on it. It only moves as far as the hands that are actually still pulling. The door in the face technique. Someone you barely know asks if you'd be willing to mentor an at-risk teenager for the next 2 years. Weekly meetings, a real commitment. You hesitate, you feel a flicker of guilt, and you say no because of course you say no. You don't even know this person's name. Then they sigh and say, "Okay, would you at least take one teenager to a baseball game? Just once?" And something in you, almost embarrassingly fast, says yes. This is the door in the face technique, and it works by doing the opposite of what you'd expect a good salesman to do. Instead of opening small and building up, it opens with a request so large it's basically built to be rejected, and the rejection is the point. Because once you've said no to something huge, saying yes to something small doesn't feel like agreement. It feels like relief. Like you finally found the version of this you can live with. Picture water pressing against a dam. Push the whole river at it, and the dam holds. Easily. That's what it's built for. But open a narrow channel right next to it, and the water that couldn't get through the front suddenly finds an easy way around the side. You weren't more persuadable after refusing the big ask. You were just under pressure, with nowhere left to put it, and the small ask was the nearest open channel. There's a second engine running underneath this too, quieter than the relief. Guilt. Turning someone down, even a stranger, even for something unreasonable, leaves a small residue behind. You don't think of yourself as someone who says no to a kid who needs a mentor. So when the second, smaller request shows up, Agreeing to it isn't really about the baseball game at all. It's about getting to feel again, like the kind of person you believed you were 5 seconds ago. Charities have built entire fundraising scripts around this. Negotiators use it without ever naming it. Even kids do it instinctively, ask for the whole weekend at a friend's house, get refused, then ask for just one sleepover, and watch how much faster that lands. So somewhere down the line, when a request that felt impossible gets quietly replaced by one that feels almost reasonable, it might be worth pausing on that feeling of relief for just a second. Sometimes relief isn't proof that the second ask was small. It's proof that the first one was never meant to be accepted. The scarcity heuristic. A sign in a shop window says, "Only 3 left." You weren't going to buy the thing. You were just looking. But now there's a number in your head, and the number is doing something to you that the product itself never did. This is the scarcity heuristic, a mental shortcut so old and so deep that it almost certainly predates language. For most of human history, things that were rare actually were dangerous to pass up. Scarce food meant a real chance you wouldn't eat again soon. Scarce shelter meant a real chance you'd freeze. So somewhere far back, your brain wired rare and valuable into the same wire, the same instinct, the same flash of urgency. The problem is that wire never got updated for a world full of fake countdown timers and limited edition sneakers manufactured by the truckload. Think about a single match in an empty, dark room. It doesn't look like much in daylight. But take away every other source of light, and that one small flame becomes the only thing that matters in the entire room. Scarcity doesn't add value to a thing. It changes how much room you have to think about anything else. There's a famous experiment that proves how shallow this trick really runs. Researchers gave people 2 identical jars of cookies, except one jar had 10 cookies in it, and the other had only 2. Same cookies, same jar. People rated the cookies from the nearly empty jar as tastier. Not different. Not special. Just rarer. And rarer to a brain running on ancient software, reads as better even when nothing about the actual object has changed at all. This is the quiet machinery behind almost every flash sale, every "only 2 rooms left at this price," every auction that somehow makes a stranger's old furniture feel like something you'd fight for. None of it is really about the object. It's about a number shrinking in front of you and a very old part of your brain that still can't tell the difference between a winter famine and a website's checkout timer. So the next time something suddenly feels urgent, valuable, almost too tempting to pass up, it might be worth checking whether the thing actually changed or whether something just told you there's only a little of it left. The identifiable victim effect. A photograph of one child looking straight at the camera raises more money in a single afternoon than a statistic about 8 million children ever could. The 8 million is true. The 8 million is, by any honest measure, worse. And the 8 million barely moves anyone at all. This is the identifiable victim effect, and it was named after research showing something almost embarrassing about how human compassion actually works. It doesn't scale. A single person, with a name, a face, a specific story, can pull tears out of a stranger in seconds. A number, even a staggering one, tends to just sit there on the page, understood but unfelt. There's a line, often credited loosely to a Soviet-era saying, that captures the whole mechanism in one breath. 1 death is a tragedy. 1 million deaths is a statistic. It sounds cynical when you first hear it. It's actually just a description of how the brain is built. You don't have a part of your mind designed to feel the weight of a million anything. You have a part of your mind designed to feel the weight of one face, one name, one specific person in front of you, because for almost all of human history, that's the only scale grief ever needed to operate at. Nobody's ancestors had to grieve a statistic. Picture a single drop of ink falling into a glass of clear water. You watch it spread, you can trace exactly where it goes, you feel the whole small event happen. Now pour that same ink into the ocean. It's still there, it still matters, technically, in the math of the thing. But there's no longer anything for your eyes to follow. The feeling drains out exactly where the number gets too big to picture. This is why charities lead campaigns with one child's photo instead of a death toll. It's why news stories about a single missing person dominate headlines for days, while reports of mass suffering elsewhere get a paragraph once and disappear. Nobody designing these campaigns is being manipulative. Exactly, they're just working with the actual shape of human empathy, instead of the shape we wish it had. And there's something worth sitting with in that, quietly, after the lights are off. The size of a tragedy was never really the thing moving you. The story was. Which means the next time something enormous fails to move you at all, it might not be because you don't care. It might just be because nobody's shown you the one face yet. The Hawthorne effect. A factory decades ago, researchers walk the floor with clipboards, dimming the lights, then brightening them, then changing the lighting again, testing, supposedly, how illumination affects how fast workers assemble parts. And every single time they change something, productivity goes up. Brighter lights, more output. Dimmer lights, more output. At one point, they change nothing at all, and output goes up anyway. The lighting was never the variable that mattered. The clipboards were. This is the Hawthorne effect, named after the factory where it was first noticed in the 1920s. And what it actually proved was something nobody set out to prove. People behave differently, work harder, perform better, follow rules more closely, simply because they know they're being watched. Not because of any specific change made to their environment. Just the fact of attention itself, landing on them, changing what they do underneath it. Think about how differently you walk when you think no one's looking versus when you can feel a stranger's eyes on your back. Your stride straightens a little. Your shoulders square up. Nothing about the floor changed. Nothing about your legs changed. The only thing that changed was the knowledge that you were being observed, and that knowledge alone was enough to edit your body in real time without you ever consciously deciding to. This is why it's so quietly difficult to study human behavior honestly. The moment you tell someone, "I'm going to watch how you do this," you've already changed how they do it. A nurse, knowing she's being evaluated, washes her hands more carefully. A student, knowing a researcher is in the back of the classroom, raises their hand more often. The experiment becomes a mirror, and people perform differently in front of mirrors than they do alone in the dark. It shows up far outside of factories and labs, too. The version of yourself that exists when somebody's watching at work, at a family dinner, on a video call with your camera on, isn't a lie, exactly. It's just a slightly different person than the one who exists when the door is closed and no one's checking. So the next time you catch yourself trying harder, sitting straighter, being just a little more careful, it's worth a quiet question. Is this because the task changed? Or because somewhere, even just in your own mind, you started to feel watched? The cheerleader effect. A group photo, 5 friends squeeze together for a selfie. Look at any one of them alone, on their own profile, in their own solo picture, and somehow, faintly, they look less attractive than they did standing shoulder to shoulder with the others a moment ago. Nothing about their face changed between the 2 photos, just the company they were standing in. This is the cheerleader effect, and it earned its name from a fairly simple observation. Cheerleaders, scientists noticed, are consistently rated as more attractive as a group than any one of them is rated individually. The effect isn't limited to cheerleaders or even to people. It shows up with photos of strangers, classmates, even objects arranged side by side. Something about being part of a cluster quietly raises how good any single piece of that cluster looks. There's a tidy explanation for why, and it comes down to how your brain processes faces in general versus faces in a crowd. When you look at a group, your brain doesn't carefully examine every individual face. It does something faster and lazier first. It calculates an average face across the whole group almost instantly, the way your eye averages out a pattern of leaves on a tree instead of counting each one. Averaged faces, across nearly every study on attraction, get rated as more symmetrical, more pleasant, more attractive than almost any single face that went into making the average. So when you glance at a group photo, you're partly seeing each person and partly seeing a flattering, blended composite that's quietly propping all of them up. Picture a choir. One voice alone, slightly flat in places, slightly sharp in others. Perfectly fine, but you'd notice the flaws if you really listened. Put that same voice inside 30 others, and the flaws disappear into a sound that's richer than any one voice could make alone. The choir doesn't fix the voice. It just gives your ear something better to listen to instead. This is, very possibly, part of why so many dating profile photos lean on group shots, not because anyone consciously thought through the psychology of it, just because, somehow, it tends to work. The crowd is quietly doing some of the lifting that no single face in it could do on its own. So the next time someone looks striking in a group and a little more ordinary standing alone, that's not your eyes deceiving you about the group. It might be your eyes were deceived, just slightly, the whole time you were looking at the crowd. The chameleon effect. Watch 2 people who are deep in a good conversation, really locked in, and you'll start to notice something they have no idea they're doing. One of them leans on the table. A beat later, so does the other. One crosses their legs. Soon the other mirrors it. One picks up the rhythm of the other's speech, the pauses, even the small gestures. Neither of them planned a single move of it. Their bodies are quietly copying each other beneath the entire conversation. This is the chameleon effect, and it's named exactly for what it sounds like, the way we unconsciously take on the postures, mannerisms, and expressions of the people we're around, like a chameleon shifting to match what's near it. Researchers proved it deliberately, having an experimenter rub their own face or shake their foot while talking to people who had no idea anything was being tested. Sure enough, the subjects started rubbing their faces and shaking their feet too, more and more, without ever noticing they'd begun. The reason it exists is older and warmer than it first appears. Mirroring is how mammals say "I'm with you" without words. Long before language, matching another creature's movements was a way of signaling safety, belonging, sameness. You move like me, so you're one of mine. Your body still runs that ancient program every day, syncing you to the people you feel close to, quietly knitting you into whatever group you're standing in. Picture two pendulums hung on the same wooden beam, started at different times, swinging out of step. Leave them alone for a while, and something strange happens. They slowly fall into rhythm, swinging together, pulled into sync by the tiny vibrations traveling through the beam they share. People do the same thing across a dinner table. The beam is just the conversation, and the vibrations are too small to see. And here's the part worth knowing, because it runs in reverse, too. The experimenters found that when someone mirrored a person, that person liked them more afterward without knowing why. The synchronizing isn't just a sign of closeness. It quietly creates it. Which is why the people who feel easiest to be around, the ones who put you at ease in minutes, are often just naturally good at falling into your rhythm. So the next time a conversation feels effortless, like you've known someone far longer than you have, look down at your hands, your posture, the tilt of your head. You might find you've been speaking a second language the whole time, one made entirely of movement, neither of you aware you were fluent. The Proteus effect. Someone sits down to play a game and builds an avatar, a tall one, broad-shouldered, confident-looking, nothing like how they picture themselves in the mirror. And over the next hour, something subtle starts happening that they never decided to do. They stand their ground in conversations they'd normally back away from. They walk up to strangers first. They negotiate harder. The body isn't real, but the behavior bleeding out of it is. This is the Proteus effect, named after the Greek sea god who could change his shape at will, and it describes something genuinely strange about how we wear ourselves. The appearance of the avatar we inhabit starts to reshape how we actually behave inside it, not because anyone's watching and reacting to us differently, but because we adjust to fit the character we think we've become. Give someone a taller avatar and they negotiate more aggressively. Give someone a more attractive one, and they stand closer to strangers, open up faster, share more. The digital costume quietly rewrites the person wearing it. Think about how you move when you put on a sharp, well-fitted suit versus an old pair of sweatpants. You don't consciously decide to carry yourself differently, but you do. Your posture finds the clothes. You inhabit the version of yourself the outfit implies. The Proteus effect is just that same instinct, followed all the way into a body that doesn't physically exist. And it turns out the instinct doesn't care whether the costume is fabric or pixels. It dresses your behavior to match either one. And here's the part that reaches past the screen, because this was never really about video games. The roles we put on in ordinary life work the same quiet way. The title on a business card, the uniform of a job, the way you behave the moment someone starts treating you as the responsible one, or the funny one, or the calm one in a crisis. We slip into the shape we think we're supposed to occupy, and then the shape starts steering us from the inside. So the next time you feel yourself becoming a slightly different person, bolder, quieter, more careful, more sure, it might be worth asking what costume you put on right before it happened. We like to believe the self drives the role. Sometimes it's the role, gently, that's been driving the self all along. The Lake Wobegon effect. Ask a room full of people whether they're an above-average driver and watch what happens. Almost every hand goes up. Not most hands, almost all of them, which is, of course, statistically impossible. Half of everyone, by definition, has to be below the middle. Nobody in that room thinks it's them. This is the Lake Wobegon effect, and it takes its name from a fictional town invented by the writer Garrison Keillor, a place where, in his words, all the children are above average. Psychologists borrowed the name for a very real and very widespread habit of the human mind. Our tendency to rate ourselves as better than average at almost everything, in numbers that simply cannot add up. In one famous survey, a striking majority of professors rated their own teaching as above average. Most people believe they're more honest, more competent, kinder, and less biased than the typical person, all of them, at once, which is the part that can't possibly be true. There's a quiet reason it happens, and it's not just ego. To judge whether you're above average, you have to compare yourself to everyone else, but you don't actually have access to everyone else. You can't see inside other people's effort, their private doubts, their hidden struggles. You only see their outsides. Meanwhile, you have a complete, detailed, generous record of your own insides. Every good intention, every reason you had, every time you meant well, even when it didn't show. So the comparison is rigged from the start. You're matching your full interior against everyone else's surface. Picture grading your own handwriting against a wall of strangers' handwriting samples. You know exactly what each of your letters was trying to be. You remember forming them. The stranger's letters are just marks on a page. Of course yours feel clearer. You're not reading them. You're remembering them. And there's something almost gentle hiding underneath this, if you don't push on it too hard. This little distortion isn't pure arrogance. It's part of what keeps people upright. A person who saw themselves with perfect, brutal accuracy, ranked honestly against everyone else at everything, might find it very hard to get out of bed. The small lie that you're a little better than the middle is in some quiet way one of the things that lets you keep trying at all. So tonight, somewhere in the soft math of how you see yourself, you're almost certainly above average at something you're actually quite ordinary at. Most people are, and maybe the kindest thing is to let that one stay exactly where it is. The decoy effect. A magazine subscription offers you two choices: the online-only version for $59, or the print and online bundle for $125. You weigh them, and maybe you pick the cheaper one, because $125 feels steep. Now, a third option appears between them: print only, also for $125. The exact same price as the bundle, but you get less. It's obviously a worse deal. Nobody in their right mind would pick it. And the moment it shows up on the page, the number of people choosing the expensive bundle jumps dramatically. This is the decoy effect. And that middle option, the print-only one nobody chooses, wasn't put there to be chosen. It was put there to be compared to. This was a real pricing setup, studied at MIT. And the third option, useless on its own, quietly changed which of the other two people preferred, without changing either of those two at all. Here's the machinery underneath it. Your brain is genuinely bad at judging value in the absolute. Ask what something is worth on its own, in a vacuum, and you'll struggle. So instead, the mind reaches for the nearest thing to compare against it, judges by relative worth, not real worth. Put a clearly worse option right next to the thing someone's selling, and suddenly that thing doesn't just look good. It looks like winning. You're not evaluating the bundle anymore. You're evaluating the bundle against the decoy, and against the decoy, it's a landslide. Picture standing next to one person at a party. Are you the tall one? Impossible to say. It depends entirely who's beside you. Now have someone slightly shorter than you stand on your left. Suddenly, without growing a single inch, you're the tall one in that little group. The decoy is the shorter person, placed there on purpose, so the thing beside it looks taller than it actually is. This is woven into more menus, pricing pages, and product lineups than you'd ever guess. The wildly expensive bottle of wine that exists mainly to make the second most expensive one feel reasonable. The giant popcorn that makes the medium feel like a steal. The phone with 3 storage tiers, where the middle one was engineered from the start to be the one you'd sensibly choose. So the next time 3 options sit in front of you, and one of them seems strangely, almost insultingly bad pause on it for a second before you skip past it. That bad option might not be there for you to choose. It might be there to choose for you. The fundamental attribution error. A car cuts you off on the highway, fast and reckless, and the word arrives in your head before you've even finished braking. Jerk, not someone in a hurry. Not someone having the worst day of their life. Just jerk, a whole human being, summed up and sentenced from 2 seconds of watching their car move. Now flip it. The last time you cut someone off, you didn't think you were a jerk. You knew the reason. You were late, or distracted, or the other car was in your blind spot, or your kid was crying in the back seat. There was a situation. There's always a situation when it's you. This gap has a name: the fundamental attribution error. When other people do something, we explain it by who they are, their character, their personality, their flaws. When we do the exact same thing, we explain it by what was happening: the circumstances, the pressure, the bad day. Same action, 2 completely different kinds of explanation, decided entirely by which side of it we're standing on. The reason is almost embarrassingly simple once you see it. When you watch someone else act, the most vivid thing in your field of view is them. The person, front and center, filling the frame. You can't see their mourning, their history, the phone call they just got, the situation pressing on them from outside the picture. So you explain what you can see, and what you can see is a person. But when you act, you can't see yourself at all. What fills your view is the situation, the circumstances all around you, the reasons. So you explain by those instead. It's not that we're being unfair on purpose. We're just each looking at a different part of the same scene. Picture a spotlight on a dark stage. Watch someone else, and the light falls on the actor. You never see the script in their hand, the director off stage, the cues they're following. But when you're the one performing, the light's behind your eyes, falling on everything around you, and the one thing it can't illuminate is yourself. And here's where it quietly matters, past the highway. This is the error underneath so much of how we judge each other harshly, and ourselves gently. The coworker who's lazy instead of overwhelmed. The friend who's flaky instead of struggling with something they haven't told you. The stranger who's rude instead of frightened, or grieving, or simply having the kind of day you'd forgive instantly in yourself. So the next time someone's behavior makes a single ugly word jump into your head, you might try, just once, giving them the situation you'd have automatically given yourself. There's almost always one there. You just can't see it from where you're standing. The actor-observer bias. You trip on a crack in the sidewalk. Without even thinking, the explanation arrives. The pavement was uneven. The light was bad. Who designed this stupid sidewalk anyway? Now picture someone else tripping on that exact same crack, 3 feet ahead of you. A different word surfaces, just as fast. Clumsy. Same crack, same stumble. 2 completely different stories about why it happened. This is the actor-observer bias, and if it sounds like a cousin of the last idea, it is but it sharpens the focus onto one specific seam in how we explain the world. When we're the actor, the one doing the thing, we reach for the situation, the circumstances, the bad luck, the conditions around us. When we're the observer, watching someone else do the very same thing, we reach for their character, who they are, what kind of person does that. The pivot point isn't the action at all. It's simply whether we're inside the moment or watching it from outside, and the reason comes down, almost entirely, to where your eyes are pointed. When you act, you literally cannot see yourself. Your gaze is aimed outward, at the world, at the uneven pavement, at everything pressing on you from the environment. So that's the story you build. It was the situation. But when you watch someone else, they are the most vivid thing in your field of vision, filling the frame, while their situation fades into background you can barely register. So that's the story you build for them. It was the person. Think of two cameras filming the same fall. One is the body cam strapped to the person's chest. It never shows the walker, only the cracked ground rushing up. The other is a bystander's phone, capturing the whole figure stumbling, the sidewalk reduced to a blur beneath them. Neither camera is lying. They're just aimed in opposite directions, and the direction is the entire difference between "the ground betrayed me" and "they should watch where they're going." There's a quiet, almost tender experiment that proves how mechanical this really is, when researchers showed people video of themselves acting literally, letting them watch their own behavior from the outside. Like an observer would, their explanations flipped. Seeing themselves from the outside, they started blaming their own character, the same way they'd judge a stranger. The bias wasn't built into who they were, it was built into the camera angle. So the next time you catch yourself certain that you stumbled because of the circumstances, but someone else stumbled because of who they are, it might be worth quietly turning the camera around. The fall looks completely different depending on which lens you happen to be standing behind. The self-serving bias. You ace the exam, and you know exactly why. You're smart, you studied hard, you've always had a good mind for this. You fail the next one, and you know exactly why then, too. The questions were unfair. The professor never covered half of it. You were exhausted. The room was freezing. 2 outcomes, 2 explanations, and notice how neatly they're arranged. The win belongs to you. The loss belongs to the world. This is the self-serving bias, and it's one of the quietest, most universal tricks the mind plays in its own favor. When things go well, we credit ourselves, our talent, our effort, our character. When things go badly, we credit the situation, bad luck, other people, circumstances beyond our control. Success is something we are. Failure is something that happened to us. The same person, explaining 2 results, somehow comes out clean, both times. There's a reason the mind reaches for this, and it isn't simple vanity. It's protection. Your sense of yourself as capable, as worthwhile, as someone basically in control of your life. That's a fragile thing, and it takes hits constantly. Taking full personal blame for every failure, day after day, would slowly crush it. So the mind builds a kind of one-way valve. Good things flow inward and become part of who you are. Bad things flow outward and become part of the weather. It keeps the self intact. It just does it by quietly bending the truth. Picture an umbrella held over your sense of self. When it's sunny, when you succeed, you fold the umbrella away and stand right out in the warmth, soaking up every ray. This is mine. When it storms, when you fail, the umbrella snaps open, and the rain becomes something happening above you, around you, never quite landing on you. Same sky, same person, different posture, depending entirely on the weather. And here's the catch that makes it worth knowing, rather than just smiling at. The same bias that protects you also blinds you. If every failure is the world's fault, there's nothing in it to learn from, no mistake to fix, no habit to change, because the problem was never you. The people who grow the fastest tend to be the ones willing, at least sometimes, to do the uncomfortable thing, to close the umbrella in the rain and ask whether some of this storm might actually have started with them. So the next time a success feels entirely earned and a failure feels entirely unfair, both might even be true. But it's worth noticing how perfectly convenient it is that they always seem to line up that way. The false consensus effect. You think a particular song is obviously overrated, and somewhere underneath that opinion sits a quiet assumption you've never examined, that most people deep down probably agree with you. You think the meeting could have been an email, surely everyone else thought so too. You'd never cheat, never lie about something that big, and you assume most decent people are basically wired the same way you are. This is the false consensus effect. Our tendency to overestimate how many other people share our beliefs, our preferences, our choices, our values. We walk around quietly assuming the world is more like us than it actually is, that our normal is the normal, and the people who differ are the strange exceptions to a rule we happen to embody. Researchers caught this neatly with a simple test. They asked students if they'd be willing to walk around campus wearing a large sandwich board sign for half an hour. Then they asked each student to guess how many others would agree to do the same. The ones who said yes assumed most people would say yes too. The ones who refused assumed most people would refuse. Both groups looked out at the same campus and saw a crowd that mostly agreed with them, and at least one of those groups had to be wrong. The reason is almost structural, built into the shape of a single life. You spend nearly all your time surrounded by people who think like you, friends. You chose, partly because they agree with you, feeds that show you more of what you already believe, a whole social world quietly filtered toward your own worldview. So the sample you're working from is rigged before you ever start guessing. You're estimating the whole ocean from one warm, familiar tide pool, and concluding the sea must taste like this everywhere. Picture standing in the middle of a room full of mirrors. Everywhere you look, there you are, your face, your stance, your expression, repeated in every direction. It feels like a crowd. It feels like agreement, like confirmation, like everyone nodding along. But it's not a crowd. It's one person, reflected back endlessly, mistaking their own echo for the voice of a room. And it matters more than it seems, because it's part of why disagreement feels so jarring, almost like a betrayal. When someone votes differently, lives differently, wants something you'd never want, the instinct isn't curiosity, it's how could they? But that shock only exists because you assumed they were like you to begin with. Drop the assumption, and the disagreement stops being an offense and becomes just information, a small, honest signal of how much wider the world is than the room you've been standing in. So the next time you're sure most people would obviously agree with you, it might be worth remembering that the people most likely to agree are exactly the ones you've surrounded yourself with. The rest of the sea is out there, and it doesn't all taste like your corner of it. Pluralistic ignorance. A classroom after a long and complicated lecture. The professor finishes, looks up, and asks, "Any questions?" You're lost? You didn't follow the last 20 minutes. But you glance around the room, and every other face looks calm, settled, like they understood it just fine. So you say nothing. You don't want to be the one person who didn't get it. Here's what you can't see from inside your own seat. Half the room is just as lost as you are, and every one of them is looking around at the same calm faces, including yours, and drawing the same wrong conclusion. Everyone is privately confused. Everyone publicly looks fine. And the silence holds, not because the room understood, but because each person mistook everyone else's silence for understanding. This is pluralistic ignorance, a situation where most people in a group privately reject something, or privately don't understand something, or privately feel a certain way. But each one wrongly believes they're the only one, because everyone else is staying quiet too. The group ends up trapped in a state almost nobody actually wants, held in place by a mirage made of everyone's hidden faces. The engine underneath it is a quiet mismatch between two things, what we feel and what we show. Inside, you're confused or uncomfortable or doubtful. But outside, you arrange your face into something neutral because you're watching everyone else for cues about how to act, and they look fine. The catch is that they're doing the exact same thing, watching you, reading your neutral face as genuine calm. Each person is using everyone else as evidence, while secretly being the thing that misleads everyone else. It's a hall of locked doors where every single person is standing behind one, certain they're the only one hiding. Picture a frozen lake in early spring, and a crowd gathered at the edge, none of them sure the ice will hold. Each person waits, watching the others, figuring someone braver must know something they don't. So nobody steps out. Not because they all agree the ice is safe, but because each one mistook everyone else's hesitation for confidence and decided to wait for a signal that was never going to come. This is how dangerous quiet survives in plain sight. It's why a bystander in an emergency hesitates. Everyone else looks calm. So it must not be a real crisis. It's why bad ideas in meetings sail through unchallenged. Why harmful traditions outlast the belief in them. Why a whole group can march toward something almost none of them privately wants. The thing holding it together was never agreement. It was a room full of people, each too afraid to be the first honest face. So the next time you're sure you're the only one who's confused or uncomfortable or quietly thinking this isn't right, it might be worth glancing around and remembering that everyone else is reading your face too. Sometimes the bravest thing in the room is just being the first one to admit out loud what half of them were already thinking. The illusory truth effect. Hear something once, and you might doubt it. Hear it twice, and it gets a little more comfortable. Hear it a dozen times from different mouths, in different rooms, in passing, in headlines, in the background of 100 ordinary days, and somewhere along the way, without ever checking whether it was true, you start to believe it. This is the illusory truth effect, and it's one of the more unsettling things ever proven about the human mind. Repetition, all on its own, makes a statement feel truer. Not better argued, not better evidenced. Just repeated, and the strangest part is that it works even when you knew better the first time. Researchers have shown people obviously false claims, watched them correctly reject them, then simply repeated those same claims later, and found that the repetition alone nudged people toward believing things they'd already dismissed. The reason hides in a shortcut your brain takes constantly, far below the level of conscious thought. When a statement comes in, your mind has to judge it, and judging whether something is true is slow, effortful work. So it quietly substitutes an easier question. Does this feel familiar? Familiar things have usually been safe. Familiar things have usually checked out before. So the brain treats the smooth, easy, recognizable feeling of "I've heard this before" as a stand-in for "this is true." Repetition doesn't add evidence, it just adds fluency, and your mind mistakes the fluency for fact. Picture a path worn across a field of grass. The first person to walk it leaves almost no mark. But let people walk that same line again and again, and the grass flattens, the dirt packs down, until eventually there's a clear, smooth trail, and everyone who comes after assumes it must be the right way, simply because it's the easiest to walk. A repeated idea wears a path like that through your mind. By the 100th time, believing it takes no effort at all, and we tend to trust the thoughts that come easily. This is the quiet machinery underneath propaganda, advertising slogans, rumors that won't die, and the strange stubbornness of misinformation. None of it needs to be persuasive. It just needs to be everywhere, often enough, until the sheer familiarity does the work that evidence was supposed to do. A lie told once is a claim. A lie told 1,000 times starts to feel like something you've always known. So the next time a belief feels obviously true, so true you can't quite remember where it came from, that might be worth a pause. Sometimes that effortless certainty is the sound of solid ground, and sometimes it's just the sound of a path worn smooth by how many times you've heard it walked. The peak end rule. Think back to a vacation, a long one, a week somewhere. You don't actually remember the week. You can't. There were thousands of moments in it, and they're nearly all gone. What you remember is maybe two things: the single best moment, the one that glowed, and how it all felt right at the end, the last day, the goodbye. And from just those two snapshots, your mind has quietly filed away a verdict on the entire trip. This is the peak end rule, and it describes something almost unfair about how memory works. When we look back on an experience, we don't average out all of it. We judge it almost entirely by 2 points: its most intense moment, the peak, and its final moment, the end. Everything in between, all that lived duration, barely registers in the final score. The middle, no matter how long, mostly evaporates. There's a famous, slightly uncomfortable study that nails this down. Patients undergoing a genuinely painful medical procedure were split into two groups. One group had the standard procedure. The other had the exact same procedure, but with a few extra minutes added at the end, where the discomfort was mild instead of sharp. Objectively, the second group endured more total pain. They were uncomfortable for longer, but because their experience ended gentler, they remembered the whole thing as far less awful, and were more willing to come back. More total suffering, remembered as less. The end rewrote the middle. Picture a long piece of music you barely recall, except for one soaring note near the middle, and the final chord it resolves on. Years later, someone asks if it was a good song, and you say yes. Beautiful, without hesitation. You're not remembering the song. You're remembering a peak and a landing, and calling that the song. Memory keeps the highlights and the exit, and quietly throws away the rest. This shapes more of your life than it seems, because memory is what we actually live with. The experience itself is gone the moment it happens. What stays, what we carry, what we use to decide whether to do something again, is the remembered version, which means how something ends has a strange, outsized power over how the whole thing gets recorded. A wonderful evening soured by one bad moment at the door. A hard year redeemed by how it closed. We are in memory far more about endings than we ever realized. So the next time you're shaping an experience for someone else, or for yourself, it might be worth caring a little less about making every minute perfect, and a little more about the peak and the goodbye. Those are the two things that survive. The rest, gently. Your mind was always going to let go. The Galatea effect. There's a quiet experiment that should probably unsettle us more than it does. Teachers were told, at the start of a school year, that a handful of their students had been identified as on the verge of a major intellectual bloom, kids about to take off. The names were real students. The identification was nothing the researchers had picked those names completely at random. There was no test, no special talent, no real prediction. Just a sentence planted in a teacher's mind. By the end of the year, those randomly chosen children had actually pulled ahead. Real gains, measurable ones. Nothing about them had been special, except that someone expected it to be. The version of this that lives inside a person has its own name, the Galatea effect. It's the part of the loop where the expectation gets into you, where what you believe you're capable of quietly becomes the ceiling or the floor of what you actually do. Tell someone, convincingly, that they're the kind of person who rises to a challenge, and watch them rise. Let someone absorb the belief that they're capable, and their effort, their persistence, their willingness to try one more time all quietly climb to meet it. The belief doesn't just describe the performance. It produces it. It runs on something almost circular, and that circle is the whole mechanism. You believe you can, so you try a little harder. Trying harder, you do a little better. Doing better, you believe a little more. Each loop tightens effort, feeding belief, feeding effort, until a self-image that started as nothing more than an idea has built itself a body of real evidence. And it spins just as easily the other way. I'm not a math person leads to less effort, which leads to worse results, which proves the very thing that caused them. Picture a seed in dark soil, holding everything it needs to become a tree already folded up inside it. Whether it ever unfolds doesn't depend only on the seed. It depends on whether anything tells it to grow. Warmth, water, light. Small external signals that say, now it's safe, become what you are. Expectation is the light. The capacity was always in there. It just sometimes waits in the dark for a reason to rise. And this is the part worth carrying off into the quiet, because the most important voice setting those expectations isn't a teacher's or a parent's or a boss's. Eventually, it's your own. The story you tell yourself about what kind of person you are capable or hopeless, someone who rises or someone who folds, isn't just a description sitting harmlessly in your head. It's an instruction. And some part of you, patiently, is always listening for it. So tonight, of all the quiet things to consider, the ceiling you assume you have might not be a fact about you at all. It might just be the last expectation you happen to believe. The mum effect. Imagine you're the one who has to deliver the bad news. The test came back wrong. The project failed. Someone's not getting the thing they hoped for. You know it has to be said, and still your mouth goes dry. The words rearrange themselves. You soften the edges. You bury the worst of it in the middle of a sentence, or you find a reason, just for now, to say nothing at all. This reluctance has a name, almost comically plain for something so deeply wired: the mum effect. It's our tendency to stay mum, silent, evasive, vague, when we're the ones who have to deliver unwelcome news. We don't just dislike bad news. We specifically dislike being its messenger, and we'll distort, delay, and dilute it to avoid the discomfort of handing it over. The reason runs underneath conscious thought, into something almost superstitious. Some old part of the mind treats the bearer of bad news as if they're partly responsible for it, as if speaking the bad thing aloud welds you to it in the listener's eyes. We fear, often without admitting it, that the bad news will rub off, that we'll be resented or blamed for simply being the one whose voice carried it. So we flinch from the role. Ancient kings sometimes killed the messenger who brought word of a defeat. The messenger, sensing exactly that risk across all of history, learned to mumble. Picture handing someone a hot coal with your bare hands. Even if you didn't light it, even if you're only passing it along, you're the one holding it now, and every instinct says to let go fast, to soften your grip, to find someone else to take it, to set it down and walk away. Bad news sits in the hands the same way. The longer you hold it, the more it feels like it's burning you. And this matters far more than a moment of awkwardness, because it quietly warps the flow of truth through every group of people. The doctor who softens a diagnosis until the patient doesn't grasp how serious it is. The employee who doesn't tell the boss the project is failing until it's too late to save. The whole organization where bad news climbs the ladder, slower and slower, getting gentler at each rung, until the people at the top are living in a fog of good reports while the ground burns beneath them. It's not that nobody knew, it's that nobody wanted to be the one to say it. So the next time you feel that dry-mouthed pull to soften something, to delay it, to let someone else carry the coal, it's worth knowing that pull is older than you and almost never on your side. The kindest thing, and the rarest, is usually just to hand the truth over plainly while it's still cool enough to do some good. The Abilene Paradox. A family is sitting on a porch on a hot afternoon, perfectly content, when someone says, "We could drive to Abilene for dinner." It's a long drive in the heat, to a place nobody's especially excited about. But one person says, "Sure, why not?" And so the next person agrees, and the next, and soon they're all in the car, 50-some miles each way. The food is bad. The drive is miserable. They come home wrung out and quiet. And then, on the porch again, the truth slowly leaks out. One of them admits they only went along with it. So did the next. So it turns out, did everyone, including the person who first suggested it, who'd only floated the idea to make conversation and assumed the others actually wanted to go. Every single person in that car would rather have stayed home, and every single one of them said yes. This is the Abilene Paradox, a story told by a management researcher named Jerry Harvey about his own family, and it points at something stranger than ordinary peer pressure. In peer pressure, a group pushes you toward something you don't want. In the Abilene Paradox, nobody wants it. The group marches off toward something that not one member actually desires, each person agreeing because they think everyone else wants it, and not wanting to be the one to rock the boat. The engine here isn't a fear of disagreement exactly. It's a fear of being the lone spoiler, the one who breaks the warm illusion that everyone's on the same page. So each person quietly betrays their own preference in order to protect a consensus that doesn't actually exist. They're not managing the disagreement. They're managing their fear of disagreement. And that fear, multiplied around the group, drives everyone somewhere none of them chose. Picture a row of dominoes, each one standing on its own, perfectly capable of staying upright. The first one doesn't fall because it wants to, it falls because it thinks it's supposed to, and in falling, it knocks the next, which knocks the next. None of them ever decided to go down. Each was just responding to the one beside it, and the whole row collapses in a direction no single domino ever chose. This is how committees approve projects everyone privately doubts, how families take trips nobody enjoys, how whole organizations pour months into plans that, it later turns out, not a single person believed in. The failure isn't too much conflict, it's too little. A group so eager to avoid friction that it can't even locate what it actually wants. Agreement, it turns out, can be just as misleading as a fight. So the next time you find yourself climbing into a metaphorical car you don't want to be in, going somewhere you don't want to go, it might be worth the small, frightening act of asking out loud whether anyone actually wants this. Now and then, you'll watch the whole group exhale and realize you were every one of you waiting for the same permission to stay home. The Diderot effect. A man is given a beautiful new dressing gown, elegant, refined, far nicer than anything else he owns. A gift. He's delighted. And then, slowly, something begins to go wrong. Beside the gorgeous robe, his old desk suddenly looks shabby, so he replaces it. But now the new desk makes the chair look worn, so the chair has to go too. Then the tapestries on the wall seem cheap against the new furniture, then the rug, then the art, until this man, who was perfectly happy in his comfortable, worn old study, has spent himself into debt and stress, chasing a harmony that the single robe quietly destroyed. This actually happened, more or less, to the French philosopher Denis Diderot, who wrote a whole essay about it, about how one elegant gift dragged his entire life out of contentment and into wanting. The pattern took his name, the Diderot effect. The tendency for one new possession to trigger a chain reaction of more, each purchase creating a fresh dissatisfaction that demands the next, a spiral that has no natural end. The mechanism underneath it is a quiet pull toward unity, the deep human need for the things around us to match, to belong together, to tell one consistent story about who we are. A single object that doesn't fit creates a small, nagging dissonance. And the easiest way to resolve that dissonance, the mind decides, isn't to send the new thing back. It's to upgrade everything else to match it. You don't return the robe. You replace the whole room around it. Picture one bright white tile set into an old, dim, yellowed floor. Before that tile arrived, the floor looked fine and lived in, ordinary, perfectly acceptable. But now there's a reference point, a small patch of brighter, and against it the entire rest of the floor suddenly looks dirty. Nothing changed about the old tiles. The only thing that changed is that now you have something to compare them to. And the comparison makes everything you already owned feel like it's lacking. This is the engine humming quietly underneath a great deal of modern spending. The new phone that makes the case, the charger, the headphones all feel suddenly inadequate. The one nice piece of furniture that makes the whole apartment feel like it needs redoing, the lifestyle upgrade that never quite completes itself, because every step up reveals one more thing that no longer matches. Contentment doesn't usually die in one big decision. It dies one matching purchase at a time. So the next time something new makes everything you already own feel a little shabby, a little not enough, it's worth recognizing that feeling for what it is. The old things didn't get worse. You just acquired a new reason to be dissatisfied with them. And sometimes the freest thing you can do is let the new tile sit there, slightly mismatched, and decide that the rest of the floor was fine all along. Crab bucket mentality. Fishermen will tell you something strange about catching crabs. If you put a single crab in a bucket, you have to put a lid on it. Because one crab alone will climb out. It'll find the edge, haul itself up, and escape. But if you put many crabs in the same bucket, you can leave it open. No lid needed. Because the moment any one crab starts climbing toward the rim, the others reach up and pull it back down. Not one of them gets out. They drag each other to the bottom, again and again, until they all stay trapped together. This is crab bucket mentality, and it names something painfully human. The way a group will sometimes pull down any one of its own members who tries to rise above the rest. Not strangers, their own. The mindset of, if I can't have it, neither can you. If I can't escape this bucket, I will not watch you escape it either. The feeling underneath it is older and sadder than simple cruelty. It's the ache of comparison. When someone beside you, someone who started where you started, in the same bucket, the same circumstances begins to climb, their rising quietly accuses you. It says it was possible all along, and you didn't do it. That's a hard thing to feel. And so, instead of facing that ache, some part of a person reaches up and pulls the climber back, because if no one escapes, then no one's escape can stand as evidence of your own staying. Their success becomes a mirror, and pulling them down is a way of smashing the mirror rather than looking into it. Picture a boat where everyone's bailing water, and one person finally manages to climb up onto the side, almost free of the flood. The others, soaked and exhausted, have a choice: cheer them up and out, or grab their ankle and haul them back into the water, so that at least they're not alone in drowning. The terrible thing is that pulling them down doesn't lower the water by a single inch. It just guarantees one more person stays under it with you. This is the quiet poison in struggling families that mock the one who goes to college, in tight communities that resent the one who leaves, in workplaces where the person who works a little harder gets frozen out rather than followed. The climbers get called arrogant, fake, too good for us now, when often all they did was reach for the rim. And the tragedy is that the bucket would empty faster if the climbers reached back down to pull others up instead of getting yanked back into the dark. So the next time someone close to you starts to rise, and you feel that small, ugly tug to remind them where they came from, to take them down a peg, to point out how they've changed, it's worth catching that hand before it reaches. Their climbing was never a verdict on you, and the only thing pulling them back down has ever accomplished is keeping the bucket full. Tall poppy syndrome. In some places, there's an unspoken rule that hangs in the air the moment anyone starts to do too well. Get a little too successful, a little too visible, a little too proud of what you've built, and you'll feel it. A coolness, a sharpening of the jokes at your expense, a quiet pressure to stop standing quite so tall. The message, never said out loud, but always understood: who do you think you are? This is tall poppy syndrome, and the name comes from a brutal old image. Picture a field of poppies, and one that's grown taller than all the others, its head rising above the rest. The story goes back to ancient times. A ruler asked how to hold power, and in answer, another leader walked through a field and silently cut off the heads of the tallest flowers, the ones that stood out. The lesson: the ones who rise above are the ones who get cut down. A whole culture can absorb that instinct, the urge to trim anyone who grows too tall, to resent and diminish the high achiever simply for achieving. It looks like the crab bucket, but there's a difference worth noticing. The crab bucket is personal, your own circle, pulling you back because your rise unsettles them specifically. Tall poppy syndrome is broader, almost cultural, a society-wide discomfort with anyone standing out, a collective leveling instinct that treats visible success itself as a kind of offense against the group. It isn't always about envy. Sometimes it dresses itself up as a virtue, humility, fairness, nobody's better than anybody else. But underneath the noble language, the function is the same: keep the field flat. Don't let anyone's head rise too far above the rest. Picture a stonemason's tool dragged across the top of a wall, shearing off any brick that juts up higher than its neighbors, until the whole surface is smooth and even and level. There's a kind of order in that flatness, a fairness even. But there's also a quiet loss, because the brick that stuck up wasn't broken. It was just taller, and in the name of an even wall, it got worn down to match. This cuts both ways, which is what makes it complicated rather than simply cruel. A culture with strong, tall poppy instincts can be warmer, more equal, less obsessed with status and self-promotion. There's real comfort in a place where nobody's allowed to lord their success over you. But the same instinct can quietly punish ambition, teach people to hide their gifts, to shrink, to apologize for excellence, until the most talented learn that the safest height is no height at all. So the next time you feel that flicker, the urge to take someone down a notch just for rising, or the urge to make yourself smaller so no one takes you down, it's worth asking what's actually being protected. Sometimes it's fairness, but sometimes it's just a field that's forgotten. It was always allowed to grow. The negativity bias. Think back over your whole day, every single thing that happened from the moment you woke up. Now notice which moments came to mind first. It probably wasn't the warm coffee, or the green light you sailed through, or the dozen small things that went perfectly fine. It was the one curt reply, the one mistake, the one thing someone said that landed wrong and is still, hours later, faintly stinging. This is the negativity bias, and it's one of the most fundamental tilts in the entire human mind. Bad things hit us harder, stick to us longer, and weigh more in our memory than good things of the exact same size. A single insult can outshout a dozen compliments. One betrayal can undo years of kindness. The negative simply has more gravity. It pulls harder on our attention, our memory, and our mood than anything good ever does. And the reason isn't a flaw, it's a feature built into us across an enormous stretch of time. Picture an ancestor walking through tall grass long ago. If they mistook a stick for a snake, they lost nothing but a moment of fear. But if they mistook a snake for a stick, even once they didn't get another chance to learn from it. So the minds that survived to pass themselves down were the ones tuned to take the negative seriously, to flinch first and relax later, to remember the dangerous thing far more vividly than the pleasant one. Every person alive descends from the warriors. The carefree ones, statistically, didn't make it. Picture a kitchen scale, the old kind with 2 trays. On one side, you pile good experiences, on the other, the bad. But the scale is rigged, the bad side is heavier from the start. So it takes maybe 5 good things to balance out a single bad one. You can stack kindness all day, but the moment one genuinely bad thing drops onto the other tray, the whole scale lurches toward it. That's not a broken scale, that's the scale you were born with, and this quietly runs more of your inner life than you'd guess. It's why criticism drowns out praise, why we replay our embarrassments at 3 a.m. and never our small triumphs, why the news is wall-to-wall disaster, because our attention reliably swings toward threat, and the whole world has learned to feed it. It's why a relationship can be sunk by the few bad memories that loom larger than all the good ones combined. But here's the thing worth carrying into the dark, gently. Knowing the scale is rigged means you can correct for it. You can notice, deliberately, that the good things were real too, that they happened, that they counted, that they were just quieter and lighter and easier to forget. The bias will always tilt you toward the bad, but awareness is a thumb you can press, softly, onto the lighter tray, not to deny the hard things, just to stop them from being the only things you weigh. The backfire effect. You show someone solid evidence that a belief of theirs is wrong. Clear facts, good sources. The kind of proof that should, by any reasonable logic, make them reconsider, even just a little. And instead of softening, something strange happens. They dig in. They believe the original thing more strongly than they did before you said a word. You didn't change their mind. You reinforced the very thing you were trying to dismantle. This is the backfire effect, and it's one of the more frustrating discoveries about how people hold their beliefs. Sometimes, presenting someone with facts that contradict a deeply held belief doesn't weaken that belief. It strengthens it. The correction backfires. The harder you push the evidence, the harder they push back, until you've accomplished the precise opposite of what you intended. The reason cuts deeper than stubbornness, and this is the part that makes it forgivable rather than infuriating. For beliefs that really matter to us, the ones tied to our identity, our group, our sense of who we are, an attack on the belief doesn't register as a neutral fact check. It registers as an attack on the self, and the mind defends the self the way the body defends against an infection, by mobilizing, hardening, throwing everything it has at the invader. The facts you offered weren't received as information. They were received as a threat, and threatened things don't update. They armor up. Picture pressing your palm flat against a heavy door, trying to push it open, and feeling someone on the other side pressing back just as hard. The more force you apply, the more force returns. Both of you end up straining, red-faced, and the door doesn't move an inch. That's a conversation where someone feels their identity under attack. Every pound of pressure you add gets matched by a pound of resistance, and the harder you shove, the more firmly that door stays shut. This is part of why arguing online so rarely changes anyone, why families can debate the same divides for decades without a single mind moving, why simply being right and having the facts on your side so often isn't enough. The information was never the bottleneck. The bottleneck was the feeling, the sense, deep down, that to give up the belief would be to give up a piece of who you are, or to betray the people who believe it alongside you. And the way through, where there is one, is rarely more force. It's lowering the stakes enough that changing one's mind no longer feels like losing oneself, separating the belief from the person, so that letting go of the idea doesn't feel like letting go of their identity. People can update astonishingly fast once they no longer feel they're under siege. The trick was never sharper facts. It was a door that didn't feel like it had to be defended. So the next time someone clings harder to a belief, the moment you challenge it, it might help to remember you may not be talking to their reason at all. You might be knocking on a door they think they have to guard with their life. And the gentlest thing, sometimes, is to stop pushing on it. The illusion of control. A person at a craps table is about to throw the dice. Watch them closely. When they want a high number, they throw hard, with force, almost flinging the dice down the table. When they want a low number, they toss them softly, gently, like they're laying something down to sleep. The dice, of course, do not care. They're tumbling cubes of chance, utterly deaf to hope and effort. But the person throwing them genuinely bodily believes, somewhere beneath thought, that how they throw can shape what comes up. This is the illusion of control, and it's our tendency to believe we can influence outcomes that are, in truth, pure chance to feel a sense of command over things that no amount of skill or will could ever actually touch. We overestimate our hand in the random. We mistake our involvement for influence. Researchers caught this with lottery tickets, of all things. People who got to choose their own lottery numbers demanded far more money to sell their tickets back than people who'd been handed random numbers, as if the simple act of choosing had somehow made their ticket more likely to win. It hadn't. The odds were identical, untouched, indifferent, but choosing felt like control, and that feeling alone changed what the ticket seemed to be worth. Picture someone leaning hard into the turn while watching a car race on television, tilting their whole body as if they could help steer a vehicle hundreds of miles away on a screen. The lean does nothing. Some part of them knows the lean does nothing, and still the body leans, because the instinct to act on what we care about, to push on the world and feel it push back, runs deeper than the knowledge that some things simply cannot be pushed. And here, unusually, the illusion isn't purely a mistake to be corrected. It's load-bearing. The feeling that we have some control, even where we don't, is part of what keeps people going. Those who feel utterly powerless over their lives tend to sink into helplessness and despair. A little illusion of control is strangely protective. It gets us out of bed, keeps us trying, keeps us believing our effort means something. The danger is only when it grows too large. The gambler convinced a system will beat the wheel, the person who refuses to accept that some storms simply cannot be steered. So the next time you catch yourself blowing on the dice, choosing the lucky line at the store, knocking on wood, leaning into a turn you can't possibly affect, there's no need to feel foolish about it. That small, stubborn instinct to reach for the wheel is part of what makes us able to face a world that, in truth, hands us far less control than we'd ever be at peace admitting. The trick is just knowing, quietly, which wheels are actually connected to anything. The Semmelweis reflex. In the 1840s, in a Vienna hospital, women were dying, not rarely in droves, of a fever that swept the maternity ward and killed mothers within days of giving birth. A young doctor named Ignaz Semmelweis noticed something the others had missed. In one ward, run by doctors, the death rate was terrifying. In another, run by midwives, it was a fraction of that. The difference, he eventually realized, was the doctors. They went straight from dissecting corpses to delivering babies, without washing their hands. Something invisible was traveling from the dead to the living on their fingers. So he made them wash. A simple solution of chlorinated lime, hands scrubbed before every delivery, and the deaths plummeted almost overnight. The fever nearly vanished from his ward. You would think he'd have been celebrated. Instead, he was ridiculed, rejected, and ultimately ruined. The medical establishment didn't just ignore his evidence, they were offended by it, because what Semmelweis was really saying, underneath the data, was unbearable. You, the doctors, the healers, have been killing your own patients with your own hands, and that was a truth too costly to accept. He was driven out, his career destroyed. He died in an asylum, broken, decades before the world admitted he'd been right all along. His name now marks the very thing that destroyed him. The Semmelweis reflex, the reflexive, almost automatic rejection of new evidence because it contradicts established beliefs, especially when accepting it would force us to admit we'd been wrong about something important. It's not careful skepticism. It's a flinch, a door slamming shut, not because the evidence is weak, but because the evidence hurts. Picture a house built carefully over many years, and someone arrives to tell you the foundation is cracked, that it's been wrong from the very beginning. They might be right, but think of what believing them would cost. The whole house, everything built on top of it, every year of work, every assumption, all of it suddenly suspect. It's almost easier, in the moment, to decide the messenger is a fool than to accept that the ground beneath everything you've built was never sound. This is why expertise, paradoxically, can sometimes make people harder to correct, not easier. The more you've invested in a belief, the more of your identity, career, and reputation rests on it, the more it costs to let it go, and the louder the reflex to reject whatever threatens it. It's the surgeon who won't adopt the safer technique, the field that buries the inconvenient study, the expert who can't hear the obvious thing the newcomer just said. So the next time a new idea makes you bristle instantly before you've even really weighed it, it might be worth pausing on that flinch itself. Sometimes the resistance is wisdom, the seasoned judgment that's seen this kind of claim fail before. But sometimes it's just a hand, instinctively reaching to protect a foundation it's terrified to examine. And the only way to tell them apart is to do the one thing the reflex is built to prevent. Actually look. The Streisand effect. In 2003, a photographer was documenting coastline erosion in California, taking thousands of aerial photos of the shore for an environmental survey. One of those photos happened to include a clifftop mansion. The owner of that mansion sued, demanding the image be removed, fighting to keep her home from being seen. Before the lawsuit, that photo had been downloaded a grand total of 6 times. 2 of those were by her own lawyers. After the lawsuit became news, the photo was viewed over 1 million times in a single month. The owner was Barbara Streisand, and her name now belongs to the exact phenomenon she accidentally created, the Streisand effect. When an attempt to hide, suppress, or censor information ends up drawing far more attention to it than it ever would have received if you'd simply left it alone. The act of hiding becomes a spotlight. The cover-up creates the very exposure it was trying to prevent. The mechanism is woven out of 2 threads of human nature, braided together. The first is curiosity. The instant something is forbidden, hidden, locked away, it becomes more interesting, not less. A door marked "Do not open" is far more tempting than an open one. The second is suspicion. When someone fights hard to bury something, we assume it must be important, must be damning, must be worth seeing otherwise. Why would they fight so hard? So the effort to suppress doesn't just fail to hide the thing. It actively advertises that the thing is worth hiding, which is the one message guaranteed to make people look. Picture trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The harder you push it down, the more force builds beneath it, until it doesn't just surface, it erupts, flying up higher and more violently than if you'd never touched it at all. Suppressed information behaves exactly like that. The pressure you apply to keep it down becomes the energy that launches it into view, and this has only grown more powerful in a connected world, where information doesn't sit in one place to be quietly removed. It copies, spreads, screenshots itself across 1,000 screens the instant anyone tries to grab it back. The takedown notice becomes the headline. The deleted post becomes the story. The thing you desperately wanted no one to notice becomes, precisely because you tried to erase it, the thing everyone's suddenly talking about. So the next time you feel the urge to forcefully bury something, a mistake, an image, a piece of the past you'd rather no one saw, it's worth weighing the strange arithmetic of attention. Sometimes the loudest possible way to announce a secret is to be caught trying to hide it. And sometimes the quietest thing, the thing that actually lets something fade, is simply to let it sit there, unguarded, until the world's attention drifts somewhere else on its own. The horn effect. You meet someone new, and within the first few seconds you notice one thing you don't like. Maybe a limp, damp handshake. Maybe they interrupted you. Maybe just something about their face. And without deciding to, without even noticing you've done it, a verdict quietly forms. And from that single sour note, you start assuming other bad things about them too. They're probably not very smart. Probably not trustworthy. Probably not someone you'd get along with. One flaw, and a whole shadow falls across the rest of them. This is the horn effect, the darker twin of a more famous bias. You may have heard of the halo effect, where one good trait, like attractiveness, makes us assume a person is also kind, smart, and competent. The horn effect is that same machinery running in reverse. One bad trait casts a negative glow over everything else, so a single flaw makes us assume a whole constellation of other flaws that we have absolutely no evidence for. The name comes from the devil's horns, the opposite of the angel's halo, one small dark detail, and we paint the rest of the picture to match. The reason we do it is a kind of mental laziness, though a very efficient one. Judging a whole person accurately is enormous work. People are complicated, contradictory, made of countless traits that don't line up neatly. So the mind takes a shortcut. It grabs the one vivid trait it can see and lets that single trait stand in for the whole. Consistency feels easier to hold in the head than contradiction. A person who is bad in one way and good in another is hard to file. A person who is simply bad is easy. So we smooth them into one note, and the note we picked was the first ugly one we heard. Picture a single drop of dark ink falling into a glass of clear water. It doesn't stay a neat little spot. It blooms, spreads, tints the entire glass until every part of the water carries a trace of it. That's what one negative impression does inside our judgment of a person. It doesn't stay contained to the thing we actually observed. It diffuses outward, quietly coloring traits it never touched, until the whole person looks darker than anything we genuinely saw. And this shapes far more than first impressions. It's the job candidate dismissed over one nervous stumble, the student a teacher quietly writes off after one bad assignment, the person whose single unpopular opinion makes everything else they say sound suspect. Once the ink is in the water, We tend to find the flaws we've already assumed are there, noticing every confirming detail, ignoring everything that doesn't fit, building a case for a verdict we reached in the first 3 seconds, so the next time someone rubs you the wrong way right at the start, and you feel that quiet darkening, that readiness to assume the worst of the rest of them, it might be worth holding the glass up to the light and asking how much of what you're seeing is really them, and how much is just one drop of ink spreading. The contrast effect. Run your left hand under cold water and your right hand under hot water, a full minute each. Then plunge both hands into the same bucket of lukewarm water at once. Something impossible happens. The same water, the identical temperature, feels hot to your cold hand and cold to your warm hand at the very same moment. One bucket. 2 truths. Your hands flatly disagree about a fact that should have only one answer. This is the contrast effect, and it reveals something humbling about perception. We almost never judge things on their own. We judge them against whatever came just before. The lukewarm water has no fixed feeling. It only feels like more or less than the temperature your hand was just adjusted to. And this isn't only about water. It runs through nearly everything we perceive, value, and decide. Our sense of what something is gets quietly hijacked by whatever it's sitting next to. Researchers have shown this with everything from temperature to attractiveness to money. People rate an averagely attractive face as less attractive right after looking at stunning ones. A $50 shirt feels cheap right after you've been shown a $500 one, and expensive right after a $10 one. Same shirt, same price, different neighbor. The thing itself never changed. Only what stood beside it did. And that was enough to bend how it looked. Picture a grey square painted on a black background, then the very same grey square painted on a white background. Set them side by side, and you'll swear they're different shades. The one on black looks pale and bright. The one on white looks dark and dull. They are, measurably, identical. Your eye simply cannot help reading each square against its backdrop, and the backdrop wins. We see the contrast far more easily than we see the thing. And this is quietly worked against you more than almost any other bias on the list, because it's so easy to stage on purpose. The salesman who shows you the overpriced house first, so the merely expensive one feels like a relief. The menu that lists one absurdly costly dish, not to sell it, but to make everything beneath it look reasonable. The negotiator who opens with an outrageous number so their real ask sounds gentle by comparison. Control what someone sees first, and you quietly control how everything after it feels. So the next time something suddenly seems like a great deal, a relief, a bargain, a reasonable ask, it's worth a quiet pause to notice what you were looking at just before. Sometimes the thing in front of you genuinely is good, and sometimes it only looks that way because of the shadow someone carefully arranged to stand right behind it. The hot-cold empathy gap. On a calm, full-stomach afternoon, you make a promise to yourself. Tomorrow, you'll eat clean just a salad at lunch, no second helpings, none of that. It feels easy to promise, almost obvious. Of course you'll do it. And then tomorrow comes, and you're standing in the kitchen actually hungry, the real animal hunger, and the salad you so confidently promised feels like a cruel joke played on you by a stranger. Because in a way, it was a stranger. The calm, full version of you made a promise that the hungry version of you never agreed to. This is the hot-cold empathy gap, and it points at one of the strangest blind spots in the human mind. We are almost completely unable to imagine how we'll feel in a different state than the one we're in right now. When we're calm, cold, we badly underestimate the power of hot states, like hunger, anger, fear, exhaustion, or desire. And when we're in a hot state, we can barely remember what calm even felt like, or that it's coming back. The two versions of us can't quite believe in each other. The reason is that these hot states don't just affect what we want. They reach in and change how we think, what feels possible, what feels worth it, who we even are in that moment. Calm. You genuinely cannot simulate the gravity of craving, the tunnel vision of rage, the desperation of real fear. You can know about them abstractly, the way you know about a country you've never visited, but you can't feel their pull from the outside. So you keep making plans, promises, and judgments from inside one state that only ever come due inside another. Picture trying to describe a blazing summer afternoon while standing in deep snow, the wind cutting through your coat. You know summer is hot. You can recite the fact. But shivering, with your breath fogging the air, you cannot actually summon the feeling of sweat on your back, of heat pressing down on you, of wanting nothing more than shade. The knowledge is there. The feeling is unreachable. That unreachable feeling is the gap, and it runs in both directions. Winter unable to feel summer, summer unable to feel winter. And this quietly explains so much of why people break their own resolutions and judge each other so harshly. It's why the well-fed shopper buys too much food, why the calm person can't understand the addict's relapse, why we're baffled by the panic of someone in a crisis when we're safe on the outside. We're not weak, and we're not stupid. We're just consistently terrible at packing for a weather we're not currently standing in. So the next time you make a promise from a place of calm, it might be wise to make it for the hungry, tired, frightened version of you who will actually have to keep it, not the serene one making it now. And the next time someone breaks under a pressure you can't feel from where you're standing, it's worth remembering. You may simply be in summer, looking at someone lost in winter, unable to feel the cold they're describing. The affective forecasting error. Imagine the one thing you're sure would make you happy. Really happy: the promotion, the house, the relationship, the money, whatever it is for you. Now picture actually getting it. How long do you think that happiness would last? Most people, deep down, imagine some version of forever, that the right good thing would lift them onto a higher plateau and just keep them there. And most people are wrong, in almost exactly the same way, every single time. This is the affective forecasting error, and it names a strange and consistent failure. We are remarkably bad at predicting how we'll actually feel in the future, and how long we'll feel it. We reliably overestimate the emotional impact of things both good and bad. The wonderful thing won't lift you as high, or for as long, as you imagine. And just as importantly, the terrible thing won't crush you as deeply or as permanently as you fear. Researchers found this in the most striking places. They studied people who'd won the lottery and people who'd become paralyzed in accidents. You'd expect a permanent chasm between them, one group floating, the other broken. But within about a year, both groups had drifted back, astonishingly close, toward roughly the same level of happiness they'd had before. The lottery winners weren't living in endless ecstasy. The accident survivors weren't living in endless despair. Both had quietly returned to something like their old baseline, almost as if a hidden gravity had pulled them home. That hidden gravity has a mechanism, and it's the part our forecasts always forget. We adapt. We get used to things astonishingly fast, and to almost anything. When we imagine a future event, we picture the raw shock of the moment it happens, and we forget that life keeps going afterward, that the new thing becomes ordinary, that we absorb it and move on. We forecast the splash and forget that the pond always goes still again. Picture dropping a stone into a calm pond. The instant it hits, the splash is dramatic, a real disruption, ripples racing out in every direction. But watch for just a minute. The ripples spread, weaken, fade, and before long the surface is calm again, smooth as if nothing had ever struck it. Every major event in your life is that stone. The splash is real. But the pond is always returning to stillness, and your forecasts only ever see the splash. There's a deep mercy hidden in this, easy to miss. The same adaptation that quietly steals the shine off our triumphs is also what carries us through our disasters. The thing you're terrified of, the loss, the failure, the change, you're sure you couldn't survive. You very likely would survive and adjust to, and one day find yourself living past, more or less yourself again. We are far more fragile than we'd like in our hopes, and far more resilient than we fear in our dread. So the next time you're certain that getting some one thing will fix everything, or that losing some other thing would end you, it's worth holding both a little more lightly. The splash is never the whole story. The pond is patient, and it has carried you back to yourself more times than you've ever stopped to notice. The illusion of transparency. You're standing up to give a speech, and your heart is slamming. Your hands are damp. There's a tremor in your voice you're certain everyone can hear. You feel utterly exposed, like your nervousness is written across your face in huge letters, like the whole room can see straight through your skin to the panic underneath. And then, afterward, someone says, "You seemed so calm up there," and you don't believe them, because surely it was obvious. It wasn't. This is the illusion of transparency, our tendency to wildly overestimate how visible our inner states are to other people. We feel our own emotions so loudly, so vividly from the inside, that we can't help assuming they're leaking out everywhere, plain for everyone to read. But they're not. The storm you feel raging inside is, from the outside, often barely a ripple. Researchers proved this with public speaking and with lying, among other things. People asked to give a speech were convinced their nervousness was glaringly obvious, but observers rated them as far calmer than the speakers believed. People telling lies were sure their deception was written all over their faces, but others caught them far less often than they feared. The inner experience and the outer signal were wildly out of sync, and the gap always ran the same direction. We think we're far more readable than we actually are. The reason is a trap we can't easily climb out of. We're stuck inside our own heads. You have total, overwhelming access to your own feelings. Every flutter of anxiety, every flash of attraction, every wave of irritation roars through you at full volume. And because it's so loud for you, you can't quite believe it's silent for everyone else. You're failing to account for the simple fact that other people are on the outside of you, with no access to the raw, only to whatever small fraction actually shows on the surface. Picture standing inside a house at night, with all the lights blazing, every room lit up bright around you. From inside, The whole place is glowing, brilliant, impossible to ignore. You assume anyone walking past must be dazzled by it. But step outside onto the dark street and look back. The curtains are drawn, and only the faintest glow leaks through the edges. What feels like a blaze from the inside is, from the outside, just a dim line of light at the window. Your inner world is that lit house, overwhelming to you, nearly invisible to everyone else. And there's a real kindness in knowing this, especially if you're someone who lives a little anxiously. The blush you're sure everyone noticed, the nervous shake in your voice, the awkward thing you said that you're still cringing over. Almost no one saw it the way you did, and most didn't see it at all. People are far less aware of your inner turmoil than your turmoil insists they are. They're too busy, mostly, worrying about their own lit houses, certain you can see straight into them. So the next time you feel painfully exposed, sure that your fear or your awkwardness or your racing heart is on full display, it's worth remembering the dark street outside. What feels like floodlights to you is, almost always, just a faint glow at the edge of someone else's glance. There, and gone, far dimmer than you'll ever quite believe. The liking gap. Two people have a conversation, a real one, the kind where they actually talk for a while, a first meeting, a getting to know you. Afterward, each one walks away with a private little verdict, and the verdict is almost always the same. I think that went fine, but I'm not sure they liked me as much as I liked them. Both of them think it. Both of them are walking away slightly, underestimating how much the other person enjoyed them. Each one liked the other, more than they believe they were liked back. This is the liking gap. The gap between how much we think people like us after we meet them, and how much they actually do. And the gap runs in one consistent, almost touching direction. People like us more than we think they do. We walk away from conversations quietly convinced we made a weaker impression than we really did, underestimating the warmth on the other side again and again. Researchers found this remarkably robust. They had strangers talk, then privately rate how much they liked their partner and how much they thought their partner liked them. Almost everyone lowballed it. They consistently believed they were less liked than they truly were, and this gap didn't vanish after a quick chat. It lingered, in some cases, for months between people slowly becoming friends, both of them privately unsure they were as wanted as they wanted the other. The reason is cruel in its simplicity. While you're talking to someone, you have a front-row seat to your own running self-criticism. You hear the joke that didn't land, the slightly awkward pause, the thing you wish you'd said better. Your inner critic narrates the whole conversation in real time, flagging every flaw. But you have no access at all to the other person's inner experience, which is very likely full of warmth, interest, and their own self-criticism. You're comparing your loud, detailed inner blooper reel against their calm, pleasant exterior, and concluding wrongly that they must not have liked you much. Picture two people standing on opposite sides of a frosted glass door, each wanting to open it, each pressing a palm gently against the surface. Neither can see clearly through to the other side, so each one stands there, hand raised, thinking, "I'd like to open this, but I don't think they want me to." And so the door stays shut, not because either of them wanted it closed, but because each one couldn't see the other's hand already resting there, mirroring their own. And this one matters, quietly, more than most, because the liking gap makes us lonelier than we need to be. It's why we don't follow up after a good conversation. Don't text first. Don't push to turn an acquaintance into a friend because some private, pessimistic accountant in our head keeps insisting the warmth wasn't mutual, but the research says again and again that it usually was. The other person walked away hoping you liked them, just as unsure as you were. So the next time you leave a conversation half convinced you came across worse than you did, that they probably didn't like you as much as you liked them, it's worth trusting the gap instead of the fear. The odds are genuinely good that on the other side of that frosted glass, someone has their hand pressed to it too, waiting, hoping, just as quietly certain that you were the one who didn't care. The beautiful mess effect. When you mess up in front of people, spill the drink, fumble the words, admit you were wrong, let your voice crack, it feels like a small disaster. Like you've shown a crack in something you were supposed to keep sealed. You assume people will think less of you for it, that the vulnerability made you look weak, foolish, smaller in their eyes. But when someone else does the same thing, admits a fear, owns a mistake, lets you see them shaky and unguarded, you don't think weak at all. You think brave. You think real. You feel, if anything, closer to them, warmer, more trusting. The very thing you'd be ashamed of in yourself, you quietly admire in everyone else. This is the beautiful mess effect, and it names exactly that asymmetry. We tend to see our own vulnerability as a weakness to hide, while seeing other people's vulnerability as courage, honesty, something beautiful. The same act of opening up, showing the soft underside, looks like a flaw from the inside and a strength from the outside. We are, almost all of us, walking around misreading the exact thing that could bring us closer to each other. The reason is a difference in vantage point. When you reveal something vulnerable, you're flooded with the risk of it, the exposure, the fear of judgment, the loud awareness of everything that could go wrong, all of it roaring inside you. But when you witness someone else's vulnerability, you don't feel their risk. You feel the result of it, their honesty, their trust in you, the gift of being let in. You're standing on the receiving end of a brave act, while they're standing in the terror of performing it. Same moment, two completely different views, and the view from the inside is the frightened one. Picture someone working up the nerve to jump into cold water. From where they stand at the edge, it's all dread the shock, the cold, the long second of falling, everything that could go wrong. But from where you sit, watching from the shore, you don't see any of the fear. You just see the leap itself, the courage of it, the splash, the person who was brave enough to go. They're trapped in the terror of the edge. You're admiring the dive. You're watching two different events that are, somehow, the same event. And this one is worth holding on to, because the cost of getting it wrong is quiet and enormous. We hide the very things that would let people love us. We keep the mask on, stay guarded, never admit the fear or the failure or the need, all to avoid a judgment that, the research suggests, mostly doesn't come. The vulnerability we're so sure will push people away is very often the exact thing that pulls them closer. We're hiding our best bridges out of fear they're walls. So the next time you're tempted to hide the mess, to swallow the apology, hide the fear, pretend you've got it all together, it might be worth remembering how you feel when someone else lets their mess show. You don't think less of them. You lean in. And the odds are far better than you fear that, on the other side of your own honesty, someone is quietly thinking the same thing about you. How brave, how human, how real. the tend and befriend response. Everyone knows the body's famous answer to danger: fight or flight. The heart pounds, the blood rushes to the limbs, the whole system floods with readiness to either swing hard or run fast. For a long time, that was the whole story, the standard picture of how every human responds to threat. But there was a problem hiding in it. Almost all the early research was done on men. And when scientists finally looked closely at how women, in particular, tend to respond to stress, they found something the old story had missed entirely. This is the tend and befriend response, and it describes a second, quieter survival instinct, one that, under threat, moves not toward fighting or fleeing, but toward protecting and connecting. Tending, turning to care for the vulnerable ones nearby, the children, the weak, drawing them close and shielding them. Befriending, reaching out to others, forming bonds, gathering the group tighter, because there is safety in numbers that no single fighter or runner can match alone. Faced with danger, this response doesn't ask, how do I win or escape? It asks, how do we protect each other and get through this together? The reason it exists is rooted in a hard, ancient math. For someone who is the primary caregiver of small children, pure fight or flight is a poor bet. You can't easily fight off a larger threat while holding an infant, and you can't simply flee and leave the helpless behind. So a different strategy survived and passed itself down. Pull the young close, bind together with others, turn the strength of the group into a kind of shield, and there's a chemistry under it. Stress can trigger the release of bonding hormones that push us toward closeness and care, so that for many people, fear doesn't only spark aggression or escape. It sparks the urge to gather. Picture a sudden cold wind cutting across an open field and a scattered flock of birds on the ground. They don't each fly off alone in a panic. They pull inward, pressing together into a tight, warm cluster, each one a little safer for the bodies pressed around it, the whole flock surviving the cold as one mass that no single bird could outlast on its own. That instinct to close ranks, to find warmth in the huddle when the wind turns sharp, is tend and befriend made visible. And there's something quietly redemptive in knowing this is wired into us just as deeply as the urge to fight. It means that part of our most basic response to fear is not aggression at all, but care, that when things turn frightening, a deep and ancient part of many people reaches not for a weapon, but for a hand. It's why communities so often pull closer in the wake of disaster. Why shared fear can forge bonds faster than years of calm. Why the instinct in a crisis is so often to check on each other, to gather, to make sure no one faces it alone. So the next time fear pulls you not toward fighting or fleeing, but towards the people you love, the urge to call someone, to hold someone close, to circle the wagons and face it together, know that it's not weakness, and it's not a distraction from survival. It is survival, in one of its oldest and most human forms. Some of us, when the cold wind comes, were simply built to huddle. The spotlight effect. You walk into a room a few minutes late, and you're certain of it. Every head turned, every eye tracking you to your seat, the whole room quietly noting your lateness, your shoes, the thing you spilled on your shirt at lunch that you're sure is glowing like a beacon. You spend the next 10 minutes hyper-aware, adjusting, hiding the stain, convinced you're the center of a quiet, judging attention. You almost certainly aren't. Most of those people didn't notice you come in. The ones who did forgot within seconds, and the stain you're hiding so carefully nobody's looking at it but you. This is the spotlight effect. Our tendency to overestimate how much other people are noticing us at all, our appearance, our blunders, our presence in a room. We feel like there's a spotlight following us around, lighting us up for an audience that's studying our every move. But the spotlight is one we're holding ourselves, and it only ever shines on us, in our own heads. There's a wonderfully specific study behind this. Researchers had students put on an embarrassing t-shirt, a deeply uncool one, and walk into a room full of peers. Afterward, they asked each student to guess how many people had noticed the shirt. The students were sure roughly half the room had clocked it. The real number was a small fraction of that. They'd felt spotlit, mortified, sure they were a walking event. Almost nobody had looked. The reason is that you are the one unavoidable, constant fact of your own life. You're at the dead center of everything you experience, every moment, without exception. So it's almost impossible to feel how completely off-center you are in everyone else's. Each person you pass is the star of their own running story, with their own lateness, their own stain, their own racing thoughts about who might be watching them. The room isn't an audience pointed at you. It's a crowd of other main characters, each privately convinced the spotlight is on them. Think of a party photo, where everyone's mid-blink or mid-bite, each person privately horrified by how they look, and not one of them noticing anyone else's flaws, because they're all too busy scanning for their own. Everyone in the frame is studying the same single face. None of them is yours. And that's a strange kind of freedom, when it sinks in. The mortifying thing you said 3 years ago that still wakes you at night. Gone from every memory but your own. The bad haircut, the trip on the stairs, the awkward goodbye, yours alone to carry, because everyone else was busy carrying theirs. You can set a great deal of that weight down. The audience you've been performing for, it turns out, was never really watching. They were too busy being watched by themselves. The curse of knowledge. There's a game people sometimes play where one person taps out the rhythm of a famous song on a table, just the taps, no melody, and the other tries to guess what it is. The tapper is sure it's obvious. They can hear the whole song ringing in their head as they tap, every note, the lyrics, the swells. It's right there. And they're stunned, every time, when the listener has no idea. To the listener, it's just a random series of knocks on a table. One person hears a symphony. The other hears Morse code from nowhere. That gap is the curse of knowledge, and it names one of the most quietly frustrating things about being human. Once you know something, you can't unknow it, and you can no longer truly imagine what it's like not to know it. The knowledge in your head feels so complete, so obvious, that you forget it isn't shining out of you for everyone to see. You assume the song is in the air, when it was only ever in your skull. That tapping game was a real study, and the numbers are almost comic. Tappers predicted that listeners would guess the song right about half the time. The actual success rate was a tiny sliver of that. The tappers were so flooded with the music they couldn't not hear that they genuinely couldn't conceive of the silence on the other side of the table. Their own knowledge had become a kind of blindness. The mechanism is that knowledge, once you have it, quietly rewrites what obvious means to you. Before you learn a thing, it's opaque, difficult, foreign. After you learn it, it folds itself so smoothly into your mind that you lose all memory of the difficulty and you start, without realizing it, to assume everyone else can see what you see. You're no longer able to stand in the doorway you walked through. From inside the room, you can't even find where the door used to be. Picture trying to give someone directions through a neighborhood you've lived in your whole life. Turn at the old oak, go past where the bakery used to be, hang a left at the crooked house. It's all crystal clear to you, a map worn smooth by 1,000 walks. But the person listening has never set foot here. They don't know the oak from any other tree, can't see a bakery that closed years ago, have no idea which house counts as crooked. What feels like vivid, precise guidance from inside your knowledge is, to them, a fog of references to things they've never seen. And this curse is everywhere once you notice it. It's the expert who can't teach because they've forgotten what confusion feels like. The engineer who writes instructions no normal person can follow. The doctor whose explanation leaves you more lost than before. The friend, deep in a hobby, who answers your simple question with 10 things you'd need to already know. None of them mean to be unclear. They've just lost the ability to feel the gap between what they know and what you don't. So the next time someone explains something and leaves you more confused than before, it isn't necessarily that they're a bad teacher or that you're slow. It might just be the curse at work, a person tapping out a song so loud in their own head that they've forgotten you can only hear the knocking. And the next time you're sure something is obvious, it's worth remembering. The symphony you hear so clearly might, to everyone else, still be just a hand, tapping on a table. The Zeigarnik effect. A waiter takes a complicated order from a full table: appetizers, mains, the special instructions, who wanted what, and carries every detail flawlessly in his head until the moment the food is delivered. But ask him about that same table 10 minutes after they've paid and left, and it's gone. Completely. He couldn't tell you what a single person ordered. While the task was open, his memory gripped it perfectly. The instant it closed, his mind let the whole thing fall away. This is the Zeigarnik effect, and it's named after a Russian psychologist who noticed exactly this in a cafe. That waiters could remember unpaid orders in vivid detail and forgot them the moment the bill was settled. What she uncovered is a strange rule of the mind. We remember unfinished tasks far better than finished ones. An open loop stays loud in our memory. A closed one goes quiet almost immediately. The reason is that an unfinished task creates a particular kind of mental tension, a low, persistent hum that won't quite let the thing go. Your mind treats incompletion as a problem still demanding attention, so it keeps the task active, keeps nudging it back into awareness, keeps it lit up and ready. Only when the task is completed does the mind get its signal of release. Done, let go, and finally allow the thing to fade. The memory was never really about importance. It was about whether the loop was still open. Picture a door left slightly ajar in a quiet house. Even in another room, some part of you stays aware of it. That thin line of dark, the sense of something not quite settled, a small pull on your attention you can't fully ignore. Shut the door with a click, and the awareness vanishes. You forget it instantly. An open task is that ajar door. Your mind keeps a quiet finger pointed at it, unable to fully rest, until something finally clicks it closed. And this hum runs underneath more of your life than you'd think. It's why a song cut off mid-note leaves you itching for the final chord. It's why cliffhangers work a story paused at its peak, refuses to leave your head, the open loop pulling you back, episode after episode. It's why an unsent message, an unfinished project, an unresolved argument can sit in the back of your mind for days, quietly draining you, while the dozens of things you actually completed have vanished without a trace. But there's a gift folded into it too, if you know where to look. The tension of the unfinished isn't only a burden, it can be a tool. The hardest part of any task is usually starting, and the Zeigarnik effect means that once you've begun, the open loop will keep working on you, pulling you back toward completion even when you've walked away. Stop a task deliberately in the middle, and your mind will keep turning it over, keep wanting to close it. Sometimes the trick to finishing isn't willpower at all. It's just refusing to let the door click shut until the thing is truly done. The reminiscence bump. Ask someone in their 70s to tell you the story of their life, and watch where the memories cluster. Not evenly across the decades, as you might expect. There's a strange thickening somewhere between their teens and their late 20s first loves. The song that played that one summer, the friends, the leaving home, the first real choices. The years that should be freshest, the recent ones, come back thin and grey. But that one decade, half a century gone, blazes like it happened last week. This is the reminiscence bump, and it's one of the most reliable patterns in the whole study of memory. When older people recall their lives, a disproportionate number of their most vivid, detailed, emotionally charged memories come from roughly ages 15 to 30. Not childhood, not middle age. That specific window glows brighter than any other stretch of life, and it does so for almost everyone, across cultures, with remarkable consistency. The reason isn't one thing, but several braided together. Part of it is simply that this window is crowded with firsts. First love, first heartbreak, first job, first time leaving home, first taste of real freedom. And the brain encodes novelty far more deeply than repetition. A first kiss carves itself into memory, while the 1000th ordinary Tuesday dissolves without a trace. But there's something deeper, too. These are the years when we're building the self, deciding who we are, what we believe, who we'll become. The memories from that period aren't just events. They're the raw material of identity, and the mind holds on to the pieces it used to construct you far more tightly than the rest. Picture wet concrete being poured and then beginning to set. In those years, the concrete of the self is still soft, still taking shape, and everything that touches it then leaves a deep, permanent impression, a footprint pressed clean and sharp. But once it hardens, once the self is largely formed, new experiences land on a surface that's already set. They leave fainter marks, shallower traces, slipping off where the early ones bit deep. That window of soft concrete is the bump the years when life pressed itself most permanently into who you'd be. And there's something quietly moving in what this means. The music of those years stays your music. Forever the songs from your late teens and 20s will likely move you more until the very end than anything released after. The friendships forged then feel load-bearing, in a way later ones rarely match. The person you decided to be in that narrow window casts its shadow across everything that follows. It's not that nothing important happens later. It's that those particular years were doing something no other years could do. Not just recording your life, but building the one who would remember it. So if you're still inside that window now, still in the soft concrete years, or just past them, it might be worth knowing that some of these ordinary days are quietly being pressed into permanence, becoming the memories you'll still be telling 50 years from now. And if you're past it, it's worth a gentle return sometime to those bright, crowded years. To remember not just what happened, but who you were becoming while it did.